had problems with addiction and have a good sense that you have ADD but are afraid of getting treatment, let's have a frank discussion about addiction and ADD. Hi, this is G.H. Glade for Coaching ADD. And addiction is a really common problem for people with ADD. People who have ADD are 5 to 10 times more likely to develop an addiction, and it starts as children. Children are 2 to 3 times at more risk for abusing substances as the general population. Estimates vary quite widely as to the occurrence rate. It's as low as 20%, and I've seen as high as 70%. There are a lot of reasons why this is. One has to do with the ADD mind. It's a busy, busy brain, and slowing oneself down is often one of the root causes of people turning to addictions. What we find is that things like alcohol and weed, they slow your brain down. And what we find is that use of things like cocaine and methamphetamine, well, they slow your brain down too, to a point. It's interesting because I worked in a major emergency room in the psychiatric section, and I talked to addicts all the time. And the methamphetamine abusers talked about this window where they felt calm and relaxed and focused. And then blood level rose and they crashed through that window and they were in full-blown tweak. People with ADD brains are more inclined to boredom, and oftentimes addictions are a way of meeting this boredom. For many people with ADD, particularly adolescents, they tend to be really reactive. They tend to be volatile, and oftentimes this takes the edge off that reactivity. People with ADD often know that they're different. They know this from an early age, and it's often compensation for that sense of lack of balance and avoiding feeling those unpleasant feelings of just feeling different. Impulsivity, poor judgment, social awkwardness, that often comes with ADD, and it paves the way for that overindulgence. People don't think of consequence, and it has to do with that perspective of time. For the ADD person, there's now, and there's not now, and not now doesn't exist. Let's also not ignore biology. We have a genetic predisposition for addiction if our parents struggled with that as well. The bottom line is there's no clear-cut reason why the risk is so much higher for people with ADD. Let's talk about what we're talking about with addiction. And the current state of thought is frankly better. They don't split hairs between dependence and addiction. It's now framed as a chemical use disorder, be it an alcohol use disorder or a methamphetamine use disorder. We could go on and on. Abuse isn't how much you're doing or how often it happens. It's about how it affects your relationships, how it affects your health, your work, your school, and your standing in the law. ADD medications are not a gateway drug. And this has been shown in research time and time again. And it actually reduces the risks. When they looked at boys who were treated for their ADD, their risk went down to exactly that of boys without ADD in terms of risk for addictions. For girls, it actually dropped below their age cohort of non-ADD peers. If you look at some of the treatment centers, for the Seattle area, there's Lakeside, Milam. Nationally, there's Hazleton. If you are appropriately diagnosed and treated for ADD, they actually want you to stay on these medications if you enter substance abuse treatment. And the reason why is very simple. You're going to retain more from that treatment experience. But the reality is, for most people, stopping alcohol or drug use isn't as hard as just staying sober, and maintaining effective ADD treatment is really key to that. Let's take a minute. If this is a useful video for you, hit that like button. But the bigger reason that I want you to stop and reflect is people you know. Who else might benefit from this video? And please do share this. This is important information that people really ought to have. Treating ADD symptoms reduces the likelihood of abuse. We have something with ADD that one of my former patients referred to it as a pause button. It allows a little bit more space between that thought or that stimuli and our response. And this is a really helpful thing in terms of people dealing with the impulsivity. Relapse occurs long before the person actually takes the medication. Maintaining sobriety is more than just getting the support of a community. And we know that people really aren't going to be able to do this on their own. A community is extremely important. But like my philosophy about treating ADD, it's not just about throwing a pill or doing one thing. It's lifestyle. It's more than just support. Things that you want to do: avoid hunger, eat 3 meals a day and 3 healthy snacks, limit sugar and caffeine intake, managing emotions, avoiding anger. Don't bury your resentments, talk about them. One of the interesting things about treatment is in Washington State, we have a program for addicted healthcare providers. And my goodness, it is easy for healthcare providers to get all kinds of drugs and know that they're safe drugs because they're pharmacological. Part of the program for healthcare providers is being in an inpatient program, having mandated follow-up, but having a year of psychotherapy, and that we have a 95% success rate after 5 years. It's more than just losing your license and livelihood. It's the fact that there are always issues around emotions with addictions. And psychotherapy is a really, really good investment in yourself. Another thing is avoid loneliness. Reach out to supportive people. That social network is really important. And it's a place of non-drug and alcohol using friends. We had this incredible social experiment without even realizing it. We had the Vietnam War. There was a huge explosion of drug abuse, and the big fear is we would have the war end and we would be deluged with people with addictions. This didn't happen. And the reason why this happened is people came home to family and support and jobs. The same experiment played out in actually Portugal. Portugal had an incredible drug and alcohol problem. And what they did is they decriminalized the use of substances. They made treatment super available. They provided people housing and job training, and the addiction rate fell markedly. We know that that aspect of a supportive place, a supportive community, is really important in avoiding loneliness, having that connection. One of the things that seems really simple is avoid becoming overtired. Get enough sleep. If you have sleep problems, go seek a sleep specialist. 90% of relapses occur between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. And this is a well-supported fact. One of the aspects of good treatment of ADD is being really mindful of getting enough sleep. You know, the bottom line is it helps your brain function better. When I look at the prospect of treating somebody with an addiction history, particularly a recent history, I approach this very differently. I want that person in some concurrent chemical dependency treatment or psychotherapy with an addictions familiar therapist. It's an absolute mandate that I be able to communicate with that therapist. The therapist is a second set of eyes and will actually see that person a lot more frequently than I will. One of the strategies is to use longer acting medications rather than short acting. And short acting have their place. Unfortunately, these meds are way too expensive. There's an interesting methamphetamine salt called Vyvanse, and it's kind of my drug of choice with ADD. The interesting part of Vyvanse is they tested it against actual practicing addicts. And there's a part of me that wonders how they get this by human services and how did they stop the deluge of people breaking down the door to get paid to use drugs? Well, they rated it on a 25-point scale. Compared to cocaine, methamphetamine, street methamphetamine, these rated 22 to 25. Well, Vyvanse rated on average a 2. Looking in an emergency room, I had a better idea what drugs cost on the street. It was almost cheaper to buy Vyvanse on the street than it was by prescription because it just didn't have what people with addictions want. It is very slow releasing. The only way it can be released is through the GI tract, where an enzyme splits the molecule. You can't boil it, you can't crush it, it's not going to work. And so this is a drug of choice if people tolerate that class. The other aspect I do is something similar to a pain contract. This means they go to one pharmacy. I like them to have a conversation with the pharmacy manager to anticipate their need for medications so they don't have to go around hunting for medications because a pharmacy doesn't have a supply. This has been a more and more common problem in the Seattle area. There's also no replacing lost medications. If you lose your medications, you go back to the U of 1.0 till the next medications are due. I also follow people with addictions history monthly. The DEA allows me to issue up to a 90-day supply of medication, which corresponds with mandate by the DEA to see people every quarter. It's different for people with addictions, particularly if they're recently in recovery. I see these people monthly. I check in with them on their use. It's part of that program of monitoring and support. There's another thing that, I debated about revealing, but in Washington State, we are all tracked on what is called the Pnp system. This is a system we employed heavily in the emergency room where you see people seeking drugs. It lets us know what was prescribed by who and when, and it's a good cross-reference in terms if people are going to multiple prescribers. Nothing also replaces a clinician being savvy about what are the patterns of misuse. Coming up short on your medications, yeah, that's a big flag. There are all sorts of things that savvy clinicians know. These are markers. And having a frank discussion about that. There should be no denial of release of information coming from treatment or therapist. If people do, then, sorry, I'm not the clinician for you. And savvy clinicians take this stance also. So again, if this has been a useful presentation for you, I want you to share it. This is important information. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I put out a video every week, and I try to have both evidence-based and relevant information conveyed in my videos. They're all evidence-based. When I put out figures, you can bet I have done my research. So this is G.H. Glade for Coaching ADD. We'll see you next week, and thank you for sharing this time with me.